Hello. My wife was planning to leave me after using my money to build a life with her cousin, so I destroyed the escape plan she had hidden on her laptop. My name is Jack. I am 39 and I work as an electrical technician for a utility contractor in Washington. My schedule is structured because most of my work involves maintaining power infrastructure and responding to outages across the county. Most of my days start early. I leave before traffic builds, spend the day on job sites or doing maintenance inspections, and usually get home around 6 unless there is an emergency call. My life has always been fairly routine, and I never had a problem with that. My wife Mary is 35. We have been married for 6 years and living in the same house for the last 4. Mary works as a secretary at a small medical office. Her schedule is stable. She usually gets home before I do and spends most evenings on the couch with her laptop or her phone. Financially, I have been the main provider. My income covers the mortgage, most of the bills, and the savings account we built during the marriage. Mary contributes some of her paycheck, but most of our stability comes from my job. We do not have kids yet. That was always something we talked about doing later once we were more financially comfortable. At least that is what I thought we were working toward. The problems did not start suddenly. They developed slowly and mostly through Mary's attitude. She always had a sharp personality, but over the last year it became openly disrespectful. She would make comments about how boring my job was. She complained that my routines made our life predictable and dull. I did not ignore it. I addressed it early and directly. I told her that constant criticism inside our own home was not something I was going to tolerate. Mary brushed it off and said I was too sensitive. The first real change I noticed was when she suddenly reconnected with her cousin Patrick. They had barely spoken in years. Then suddenly Patrick was everywhere in her life. Late-night phone calls, weekend visits, conversations that stopped the second I entered the room. Patrick had a reputation in the family for always chasing some new opportunity that never quite worked out. He talked about business ideas constantly. Real estate flips, online stores, import deals. None of them ever actually turned into anything stable. At the time, I assumed Mary just enjoyed having someone around who shared her restless energy. What I did not realize back then was that the two of them were already working on something behind my back. And the money quietly making it possible was coming straight out of my pocket. Looking back now, the financial side of it should have raised questions earlier. But at the time, nothing seemed obviously wrong. Mary had access to our shared checking account because that is where I deposited my paychecks and where the mortgage and utilities were automatically paid from. Her explanation was always simple. Small expenses, helping family, covering something temporarily. And because the amounts never looked extreme at first, I did not immediately treat it as a problem. The first time Patrick actually showed up at the house was about 8 months ago. Mary told me he needed a place to stay for a couple nights while he figured out some work situation in the area. I had never met him before, but I try to be reasonable about family. Those couple nights turned into almost 2 weeks. Patrick was the type of person who talked constantly about plans, but never seemed to actually be doing anything during the day. He slept late, drank our coffee, and spent most of his time on his phone or laptop. Mary acted like this was completely normal. Whenever I asked how long he planned to stay, she would snap back that he was family and that I should stop acting like a landlord. Patrick was polite when he spoke to me, but there was something about the way he watched things in the house that I did not like. He asked a lot of questions about my work schedule, what time I usually left, whether I was sometimes gone overnight for emergency repairs, how often I checked our accounts. At the time, it came off like casual conversation. Now I understand it was information gathering. Eventually, Patrick left, saying he had found a place to stay with a friend across town. After that, he and Mary kept talking almost daily, sometimes late at night after she thought I had gone to sleep. I did not immediately jump to conclusions because their conversations sounded more like planning something than flirting. Numbers, locations, references to apartments and deposits. At the time, I assumed they were trying to start some kind of business together. What I did not know yet was that the planning had nothing to do with business. They were building an exit plan. And according to the documents I would eventually find, I was the one paying for it. The first real sign that something was wrong came from something small. One evening, I was paying bills and reviewing our checking account like I usually do at the end of the month. I am not obsessive about it, but I like to make sure everything lines up with what we expect. That night, I noticed several transfers that I did not recognize. They were not huge amounts. A few $100s here, $600 there, always labeled as basic payment app transfers. When I asked Mary about it, she did not hesitate. She said Patrick had been struggling to get on his feet, and she had helped him out a few times. Her tone immediately turned defensive when I asked how many times. She told me it was her family and that I was acting controlling over money that belonged to both of us. That response irritated me because the numbers were not insignificant anymore. When I added them up, it was close to $4,000 over a few months. Still, I kept the conversation calm. I told her helping family occasionally was one thing, but several $1,000s without even mentioning it first was another. Mary rolled her eyes and told me I was acting like a bank manager instead of a husband. That was the moment I made a quiet decision. From that point forward, I started paying closer attention. I did not confront her again right away because arguing with Mary rarely produced honest answers. Instead, I simply watched. Over the next few weeks, I noticed a pattern. Transfers would happen late at night, sometimes right after one of her long phone calls with Patrick, sometimes the next morning after she spent an hour on her laptop before leaving for work. The amounts slowly increased. $800, $1,200. Once it was $2,000 in a single transfer. When I asked about that one, she snapped immediately. She said Patrick was putting together a housing situation and needed help with a deposit. Her exact words were that it was temporary and that he would pay us back once things stabilized. That explanation made enough surface-level sense that pushing harder right then would only start another pointless argument. But something about the way she said it bothered me. It sounded rehearsed, like she had already practiced the answer before I even asked the question. And that was the point where I started wondering if the money was actually going where she claimed. What I did not know yet was that the real evidence was already sitting inside the laptop she used every night on the couch next to me. Mary used that laptop constantly. Every evening after dinner, she would sit on the couch with it open while half watching whatever show was on TV. Sometimes she said she was handling work emails from the clinic. Other times, she said she was helping Patrick with paperwork for whatever project he was supposedly working on. Up until that point, I had never touched it. It was technically hers, and I had never had a reason to go through her things. But once the money transfers started adding up, the situation stopped feeling like normal privacy and started looking more like financial dishonesty. The opportunity came on a Tuesday night. Mary fell asleep on the couch around 10 with the laptop still open beside her. That was not unusual because she had been staying up late talking to Patrick again. Normally, I would just wake her up and tell her to go to bed. That night, I closed the living room blinds, muted the TV, and quietly moved the laptop to the kitchen table. I was not even sure what I was looking for yet. At first, everything looked ordinary. Her email inbox was mostly work reminders and appointment schedules from the clinic. Her browsing history was nothing interesting either. Online shopping, streaming sites, recipe pages she never actually used. For a moment, I thought maybe I was just letting my irritation with the money situation get the better of me. Then I opened the documents folder. There were several normal-looking files, budget spreadsheets, a few resumes that looked like Patrick had sent them for editing. But one folder stood out immediately. It was labeled Simply New Start. Inside were about a dozen documents. The first file I opened was a spreadsheet. And that was the moment the situation stopped being a vague suspicion and turned into something much more deliberate. The spreadsheet was not about Patrick getting back on his feet. It was a full financial plan, estimated living expenses, apartment deposits, furniture costs, transportation, even projected monthly income assumptions. At the top of the sheet were two names listed under household occupants, Mary and Patrick. My name did not appear anywhere on the document, and every single funding entry listed the same source, transfers from our joint account. I spent the next 20 minutes going through every file in that folder. Each one made the situation clearer and worse at the same time. There was a lease estimate document for an apartment across town, a one-bedroom place in a newer complex. The projected move-in date was about 3 months away. There was also a checklist document titled Relocation Steps. It listed things like setting up utilities, changing mailing addresses, and arranging a moving truck. Everything about it was written as if the move was already decided. The strangest part was how organized the entire thing was. Mary had always been disorganized with normal life tasks. Bills sometimes sat on the counter for days before she paid them. Laundry piled up. Grocery lists were never finished. But this plan was detailed. Every expected expense had been calculated. Security deposit, first and last month rent, furniture budget, emergency savings, even a section labeled 6-month survival cushion. And under the funding column, the same note appeared repeatedly. Transfer from joint account. Transfer from Jack's salary deposit. Patrick contribution later. That last line appeared several times. Patrick contribution later. It was written like a reminder instead of a confirmed payment. which told me something important. Patrick was not actually funding any of this yet. I was. The more files I opened, the more obvious the timeline became. They were slowly building money for their move while pretending it was temporary help. A separate document even tracked every transfer Mary had already sent him. The total was just under $11,000. Seeing the number written out like that made my stomach drop for a moment. But the document that really explained everything was the last one in the folder. It was a simple text file, not a spreadsheet, not a checklist, just a conversation summary written by Mary herself. It described the plan in plain language. Patrick would secure the apartment. Mary would quietly move money over the next few months. Once everything was ready, she would leave while I was at work. According to her own notes, she expected me to be too confused to react quickly. Reading that line was the moment something in my head shifted. I stopped feeling shocked and started thinking about how to shut their plan down completely. I did not wake Mary up that night. I closed every document, put the laptop back exactly where it had been, and sat in the dark living room for a while thinking about what I had just read. The initial reaction most people imagine in that situation is anger, but what I actually felt first was something closer to clarity. Mary had already made her decision. The plan was written out step by step on her own computer. She was not confused. She was not undecided. She was actively preparing to disappear while using my money to finance the transition. So yelling at her in the middle of the night would not fix anything. It would only warn her that I knew. Instead, I went to bed and treated the next morning like any other workday. Mary left for the clinic around 8. The second her car pulled out of the driveway, I started making calls. The first call was to the bank. I explained that I needed to review access permissions on our joint account and adjust transfer limits. The representative walked me through several security options that I had never bothered setting up before. Within 20 minutes, I had alerts enabled for every transaction, transfer limits reduced, and external payment authorizations removed. Mary could still use the account for normal purchases, but moving large amounts of money out of it was no longer going to be simple. The second thing I did was open a new personal account at the same bank. My salary deposits had always gone directly into the joint account. That changed that morning. Starting with my next paycheck, the money would go into the new account first. Then I would transfer what was necessary to cover the mortgage and bills. Nothing more. The third step required a little more patience. I drove to a local electronics store and bought a small external hard drive. When I got home, I opened Mary's laptop again. This time I copied every single file from the New Start folder. Spreadsheets, planning documents, her written summary of the plan, all of it. Because if Mary eventually tried to rewrite the story of what happened, I wanted a clear record of what she had actually been doing. By the time I finished, the sun was already starting to set. Mary would be home soon, and as far as she knew, her escape plan was still completely intact. For the next 2 weeks, I did not change my behavior at all. That part was important. Mary continued acting exactly the way she always had. She came home from work, complained about small things around the house, and spent most evenings messaging Patrick or working on her laptop. And because she believed I had no idea what was happening, she kept moving forward with the plan. The bank alerts I set up made the pattern very easy to follow. About every 4 or 5 days she attempted another transfer. Sometimes it was $500, sometimes $1,000. But now every transaction triggered a notification on my phone within seconds. And thanks to the transfer limits I had put in place, most of the larger ones simply failed. The first time that happened, she mentioned it casually during dinner. She said the bank must have updated their system because a payment to Patrick did not go through. I shrugged and told her I had no idea. She rolled her eyes and complained that banks always made things harder than necessary. What she did not know was that I could see every failed attempt in real time. After the third block transfer, her behavior started changing slightly. She became more irritated than usual, more impatient. One night she even snapped at me because I asked what she wanted for dinner. But she still never suspected that I knew the reason. During that time, I kept reviewing the documents I had copied from her laptop. One detail in particular stood out the more I looked at it. Patrick was supposed to secure the apartment first. Mary had written that part clearly in the notes. Once he signed the lease, she would finalize the money transfers and leave while I was at work, which meant the plan depended on one thing: that apartment lease. And about 10 days after I found the documents, I finally saw the proof that Patrick had started the process. Mary left her laptop open again one evening while she took a shower. A new document had been added to the New Start folder. It was a scanned rental application. Patrick's name was listed as the primary tenant. Mary was listed as the second occupant. The projected move-in date was now only 5 weeks away. That was the moment I realized something important. If I wanted to end this situation cleanly, I could not just react to their plan. I needed to make sure it collapsed before they ever reached the move-in date. Once I saw the rental application, the situation became a timeline instead of a suspicion. 5 weeks. That was how long Mary thought she had before quietly disappearing with Patrick into the apartment I had unknowingly helped fund. I decided that was more than enough time to end the situation on my terms. The next morning I took the day off work. Mary left for the clinic around 8, like usual. She barely looked at me before walking out the door. That had become normal over the past few months. The first thing I did was go back through every document I had copied from her laptop. The apartment complex name was listed on the application Patrick had submitted, so I called their leasing office. I did not introduce myself as an angry husband or start making accusations. That would have made the conversation messy. Instead, I simply asked to confirm a few details about a rental application connected to my household finances. Once the leasing agent realized the application listed financial transfers from an account tied to my name, she became very cautious. I explained that the funds referenced in the application were taken from a joint account without my knowledge and that I was documenting the situation. I did not ask them to cancel anything directly, but I made it very clear that any lease involving those funds could become part of a financial dispute. The agent told me she would flag the application for review, which was exactly what I wanted. Patrick's entire plan depended on that lease being approved quickly. Now it was sitting in administrative review instead. After that call, I came home and started the second step. Mary's clothes, personal items, and boxes of things she barely used were all over the house. I spent most of the afternoon packing everything into moving boxes and placing them in the garage. Not destroying anything, not throwing anything away, just removing it from the living space. By the time Mary's car pulled into the driveway that evening, every trace of her daily life inside the house had already been packed. She walked through the door, looked at the empty living room shelves, and froze. Then she saw the stack of boxes visible through the garage window. Her first reaction was anger. She demanded to know what the hell I thought I was doing. I did not raise my voice. I simply told her that her plan with Patrick was finished, and that if she wanted to start a new life with him, she was welcome to begin immediately. Just not in my house. Mary stood in the middle of the living room staring at the empty shelves and the packed boxes in the garage. At first, she tried to turn it into an argument. She demanded to know why I had touched her things and started accusing me of acting crazy. I let her talk for about 30 seconds. Then I walked over to the kitchen table and placed the external hard drive down in front of her. I told her calmly that I had already seen everything. The spreadsheet, the apartment plan, the relocation checklist, the note she wrote explaining how she expected to leave while I was at work. The moment I said Patrick's name, her expression changed. Not shocked, more like someone realizing a bluff had just been called. She tried one last week defense. She said I had no right to go through her laptop. I told her she lost the right to complain about privacy the moment she started using my salary to fund a secret move out of the house. Then I explained the rest. I told her the bank transfers had already been blocked weeks ago. I told her the money pipeline she thought she had access to no longer existed. And I told her Patrick's apartment application was currently sitting in administrative review after I spoke to the leasing office. That was the moment her confidence disappeared completely. She asked if I was serious. I told her I was very serious. Then I explained the final part. Her plan had involved leaving while I was gone at work, so she would not have to deal with confrontation. But now we were having that conversation face to face. I pointed toward the garage and told her everything she owned was already packed. If she wanted to move in with Patrick, she could start tonight. Just not here. Mary tried switching tactics after that. First she got angry. Then she tried acting like the whole thing had been misunderstood. Then she said Patrick had just been helping her look at options. But the problem for her was simple. I already had every document. So I did not argue. I just repeated the same sentence. You made a plan to leave. Now you can follow through with it. Just not from inside my house. She stood there for a long time staring at the boxes in the garage. And for the first time since I had known her, she looked completely unprepared for the consequences of her own decisions. Mary did not argue much after that. The reality of the situation had already landed. Her entire plan depended on two things: quietly moving money and leaving before I realized what was happening. Both of those options were already gone. She stood in the garage for a while looking through the boxes I packed. Clothes, shoes, her office bags, some decorations she had bought over the years. I stayed inside and gave her space to deal with it. Eventually, she came back into the house and asked one question. Where was she supposed to go? I told her the same thing I had already said. Patrick seemed very involved in planning her new life, so he could help her figure out the next step. She tried once more to soften the situation. She said maybe we could calm down and talk about things in a few days. I told her that part was already over. You do not secretly build a financial exit plan with someone else and then pretend the marriage is fine once it fails. After that, the conversation ended. She went back into the garage, loaded what she could fit into her car, and left the rest of the boxes stacked near the door. About an hour later, she drove away. No dramatic goodbye, no apology, just the sound of the car pulling out of the driveway. The first thing I did after she left was simple. I blocked her number. Then I blocked Patrick's number. After that, I removed both of them from every account or service they had ever been connected to. The bank access was already restricted, so I closed the remaining permissions completely that same night. Over the next few weeks, Mary sent a few emails from different addresses asking if she could come back to collect the rest of her things. I allowed it once. She came by while I was home, took the remaining boxes, and left without saying much. Not long after that, I contacted a lawyer and filed for divorce. The process was straightforward because we had no kids and the financial records were very clear. The documents from her laptop also made it obvious where a large portion of the missing money had gone. A few months later, the divorce was finalized. Looking back now, the strangest part is how confident she had been that the plan would work. She believed I would sit there confused while she quietly built a new life with someone else using money I had spent years earning. Instead, the whole thing collapsed before she even packed a single box. And honestly, the quiet house after the divorce felt a lot more stable than the one we had been living in during the last year of that marriage. Bye-bye.